With the completion of the first fully private mission to the International Space Station recently, we thought it was worth having a think about the future of commercialization of space stations.
And with that in mind, we're talking to two members of the ThinkOrbital team, co-founder and CEO Sebastian Asprella and VP of Technical Development Jim MacConnell, to find out all about their plans for commercial space stations.
Please keep in contact with us at Space and Things 1 on Twitter and at Space and Things Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, or via the contact form on our website.
And please leave us a review if you enjoy what we do. We'd love to get to 100 5-star ratings by our 100th show, so go and do it! Or just sit back and enjoy episode 88 of the Space and Things podcast.
Oh my God! Unbelievable! Unbelievable, but it is great to touch.
You are listening to Space and Things with Dave Giles and Emily Carney.
I'm Emily Carney.
And I'm Dave Giles, and welcome to episode 88, which we recorded last week because Emily is off in Houston for a training week with her new job with Celestius, and I'm busy in London enjoying the events organised by Christina Corp for Space for a Better World. Unfortunately, that means no news and sports in this week's podcast, but I promise we'll catch up next week.
But that does mean that we can get straight into this week's interview. In episode 85, we spoke about Axiom Space and their plans to build a private space station and focused on their first crew mission to the ISS. Well, that got us thinking about the future of commercial space stations. Currently, the ISS is due to be decommissioned in 2030, probably somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. And NASA have said they want the private sector to fill the void. So today we're talking to two members of one of the teams which are trying to do just that. ThinkOrbital are developing the Orb-2, a large, scalable, and cost-efficient orbital spaceport which can be used for a variety of different tasks.
So we're joined today by Sebastian Asprella, co-founder and the CEO of ThinkOrbital. He has over 25 years of leadership and entrepreneurship experience across business management, IT, pharma, and aerospace sectors, leading complex multinational transformation and digitalization programs.
We also have Jim MacConnell, Vice President of Technical Development. Jim has over 40 years of research and development experience working with aerospace leaders, including Boeing, Exotic Metals Forming Company, Tethers Unlimited, Altius Space Machines, and Consensus Technology. So let's do this.
Oh, that's it, Bill. Well, it's sun is in my eyes is the only thing. Put on your dark glasses, look casual. Okay, can you see me now? I have my eyes closed, yes. You're beautiful. I'll look down this way.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to start with a question for Sebastian. Let's go to the very beginning. When was ThinkOrbital started, and are the objectives different now than they were at the very beginning?
Thanks for having us once again. It's an absolute pleasure. ThinkOrbital started in late February, early March last year. And the origins of ThinkOrbital are threefold. One is the founding thesis, which is being able to assemble infrastructure in orbit or real estate in orbit. I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about that in a moment. Mm-hmm. I think the personal interest and ambition of solving some of the most challenging engineering aspects of being able to access space and broadening access to space. That's the second one. And the third one is to do, at least at the personal level, I'd love to go out into space, but I strongly believe that giving access to humanity, to a larger set of humanity, certainly larger than what we have done so far, can help spur a change in our consciousness, in our minds. I know it sounds a little bit esoteric, but trust me, I've been through this thought process quite a lot. And I'm not the first one who talks about this. We talk about to astronauts, also how, Frank Knight has coined the overview effect. So I strongly believe by giving that extra access, maybe we should send all the G20 members up into space, really to try and bring humanity closer together. To try and realize that we're one with nature, we're one with ourselves, and we should be more conscious about that. And look after each other a bit more. In terms of the objectives, we have a number of 12 objectives, which are internal objectives within ThinkOrbital, and the objectives they do move, and I think that is natural, especially when it comes to a startup. What hasn't changed, it's our vision and our mission, which is more or less what I have outlined before. Now, in terms of our objectives, I would cluster them in 3 areas. So one of them is to ensure that the products that we're developing from a feasibility standpoint, from a technology standpoint, they're achievable. And there's a lot of hurdles that I'm sure we're going to come across, and that's why we have such a depth of aerospace engineering, starting from Gene MacConnell and Ryan and many other team members. But for sure, we're building the technology from the ground up. The second cluster of objectives are to do with the market, the customers, understanding, how do we fit in that environment? What added value we can bring in? There are not enough data points to have a strong signal. So it's like having a finger on the pulse every day. And the third cluster of objectives is really to stand up the team, to stand up ThinkOrbital, to make sure that we are going concern, that we operate, successfully and effectively as much as we can. And also space, it's a hazardous environment. So we're looking at safety emission assurance. We're looking at having the standards and the processes in place and the procedures in place to go ahead. And ultimately, to be able to bring all of that together, to be able to deliver a number of products that we have identified so far. And again, hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about them a little bit more. But I would say that's where we stand so far. And it's been such a blast, Dave and Emily. I could have never imagined how wonderful the aerospace industry is, how wonderful the people in the aerospace industry is, how much passion we have come across. And I think ultimately we all want to go to space, we all want to be able to give that spark of a sensation of adventure, that there is something out there for us to go and explore. And I think it's probably even in our DNA.
So were there any space figures, anybody, notable in the aerospace industry, past, present, future, that inspired you guys to do this?
Since I'm a child, I look up to the stars. Sometimes I even feel I kind of belong there, which is, I would say, is a bit weird, but I put my hand up. I may be a little bit weird myself. I had a few of the astronauts that really caught my attention, but I think overall was this sense of human endeavor and human ingenuity that really fascinated me. My brain does operate to some extent on the sort of engineering side, on the business side, and on the sort of human mind side. So it's sort of looking at it from the perspective of so many thousands of people that have come together to be able to achieve something that many have considered impossible, and at the pace that we have gone forth. And I keep repeating myself that we're standing in the shoulder of giants. The Mercury, all the people who have stood up the early aerospace industry, going all the way through the shuttle era and what we've seen today. And if I was to fast track a little bit, it's difficult not to get inspired by what the likes of SpaceX and Elon Musk and Hans Konigman and Thomas Mueller and Lee Rosen and all of these guys that, have really changed I would say to a large extent, the future of humanity. And equally, having access to, direct access to some of the advisors we have on the team. And one of them has actually gone to space. He's an astronaut 6 times to space. He's the highest number of commandeering missions. He's Commander Jim Weatherby. And all of our advisors just amazing. And having the chance to talk to somebody who has been to the Russian space station and to the International Space Station, I have such an admiration for him. And then, they're all cool, calm, and collected. They're the right stuff, as they used to call it. And I'm just so impressed with the level of humility that they have. So that's me.
What about you, Jim?
Yeah, I can chime in just for a little bit. I'm an engineer, and I hate to admit it, but in terms of people that have inspired me, I can't add any names. For me, it's visual. I'm a very visual person, and my inspiration is actually watching an old black and white TV with somebody stepping on the moon. And so my inspiration is not necessarily people-centric, but more, like I say, more visual. I've got to be there. I've got to be part of that. My career started out in space and working on the real hardware. And there's always been this, we can do it type of feeling that I have. So that's not a great answer, because I can't say these are the people who are inspiring me to go on. I think everything that is happening now is just phenomenal. but it's been our destiny ever since we took that first step off on and shared that around the world on little black and white TVs that were as deep as they are wide, the old boxes. So I'm driven more by it's just our destiny, and I'm going to be part of it.
I love that. I love that a lot. Right, let's get on to, and while we're talking to you, Jim, let's have a question that I think is probably more your field. So tell us about the space station and the lower Earth orbit habitats and the new technologies that ThinkOrbital will utilize. It's just been May the 4th, which has got me wondering, is it going to be like the Death Star?
Well, our first firm contract is with the Air Force doing a space-based weapon system that will obliterate everything else in orbit.
So yes.
No, that's not true. that is not true. I think in terms of the Orb 2, which is the name for our space station, it's really, really cool. And the reason I'm involved in ThinkOrbital is in terms of new technologies, we're drawing on a wealth of existing technologies. We're just applying them in a new way. Mm. So that's really what we're doing. And we're, in essence, changing the paradigm of what it means to be in like low Earth orbit. I mean, the new space economy is built on CubeSats and nanosats and internet connections and things like that. We're looking at actually people. Okay, we're talking about moving off. I mean, Starship is great for getting huge mass up in orbit and for ultimately going to Mars. I don't think it's actually the kind of thing that this is going to sound like heresy, get us off the planet. We need to have places to be. We need to have huge masses of people. And Starship is a transportation system. It's the bus that gets you places. But you've got to have houses. You've got to have housing, warehouses, manufacturing spaces, all of those things up there. And that's what we're targeting. Mm. So in terms of the technology, we're taking advanced welding technology and robotics and everything else and putting it together in a way that provides what we believe is really needed for stepping off the planet.
So we've got some questions from some of our Patreon subscribers, and this one feels relevant to discuss now. Rish has asked, will you be able to group Orb 2s together to create larger stations and infrastructure, or are there plans to build larger versions?
So, like Jim was saying, our current technology is to be able to master assembling infrastructure in space. Now, to be able to get to large infrastructure connected with tethers where you can simulate some of the microgravity that you have on the moon and Mars, there is a technology roadmap that we have defined with the team. So yes, in short answer, eventually we're looking at clustering a number of Orb 2s for them to be able to provide very, very large volume. I mean, one early product that we are developing currently at the moment on paper and with some designs and some architecture behind it can have about 16,000 cubic meters. Just to put you in perspective, the ISS is 900 cubic meters.
Wow.
So this is huge. This is really, really big. And there's a few ways you can get around it. And one of the ways we thought about it, in fact, is to have 4 Orb 2s interconnected with tethers and also, sharing some of the substack of technologies and capabilities that we need, like power and radiators and what have you. But the question is, how do you get there, right? So how do you take those first steps? And this is, I think, what's important on how we're focusing, developing that technology. As I mentioned earlier, looking at the market, engaging with some of our early customers. We have some prospective customers of letters of intent. And what we want to focus on is, once we have proof that we can weld, that we can assemble a sphere, let's say a shell in space, then our first product would be to augment existing free-flying space stations, to be able to provide them with additional real estate at a much more reduced cost for perhaps storage, maybe for entertainment activities, maybe for shooting a film, something that they would have had to be quite constrained when it came to budget. Now, once that is completed, we have gone through the full cycle of the minimum technology stack for us to have Orb 2s going to the next generation. And the next generation is to be able to provide a module that you can perform in space, servicing, manufacturing, and assembly activities. And this could be perhaps for assembling a large space asset that otherwise you have to go through so much qualification and testing that we've seen recently with the James Webb Telescope. because there's vibrations, there are G-forces when it gets launched, and instead you can have smaller parts and assemble them up there. At the same time, you could be servicing some of those assets. You could be repairing some of them. You could even be recycling them as well. So that's our second product. Now, the third product, a little bit more down the road, will be the first full free-flying space station, where you have all the capabilities required to sustain human life. And there we're looking at LEO and perhaps some other orbits as well. And then finally, our last product, it's the one that we started, or perhaps the answer to the question. Yes, the plan would be to grow as the technology grows, to grow as the market grows, and then take the technology to where the needs are and the pain points of our customers.
Talking of which, we've had a question from Daniel Gillies, another one of our patrons, a new patron. Welcome, Daniel. And he's got actually a couple of really great questions. First, based on what you just said about customers, what do you see as your main source of revenue at the moment? And this all sounds very expensive. Do you have a kind of total cost for what it's going to be to get one of these things up there? Or will you just keep going until it happens?
No, I think that's a great question. We don't believe in build it and they will come. So this is the reason why very early on, since we stood up ThinkOrbital, we started engaging with the initial customers that we felt would benefit and have value from our products. We're having a conversation with some of them in terms of how much we can disclose, but we do have at the moment 4 letters of intent. These are obviously non-binding, but this is an early indication that they're interested in our products. And the products that they're interested, they cover mostly the product number 1 and 2. So the annex sphere to a free-flying space station and this sort of awesome debris management platform number 2. In terms of cost, yes, I mean, this can be extremely expensive if we do things as they have been done before. For example, Dave or Emily, if you wanted to have a car built specifications only for you, I mean, that car itself would cost you probably 700 million, or depending how complicated it may be, it can cost you quite a lot of money. And I mean, maybe it's not the best analogy, but this is somewhat how most of the spacecraft have been built. Yeah. They have been built for a one-off, perhaps with a duplicate to keep here on Earth. And this is extremely expensive. And where we see the game changer when it comes to, for example, the work that the likes of SpaceX have done, obviously a fully reusable rocket, that would be a killer app. But their focus is in industrializing the process of manufacturing. It's not that it's easy to design a product and do the first prototype. I'm not saying it is easy, but it's extremely hard to be able to build a product at scale and to be able to scale that product and that manufacturing capabilities. Once you do that, then you have the economies of scale, and overall you can bring the cost down. So if we want to do the things as we have done in the past, we would not be doing what we do now. I mean, to me, it would not be inspirational. It would be kind of evolutionary, but not revolutionary. What we've got now is a cost killer. So that's why we're looking at a technology that can be flat pack with a single launch, that can, therefore can be unshackled from the tyranny of the rocket fairing and the payload. We're looking at manufacturing most of the items at scale, and then looking at being able to provide fairly high volume in terms of what we have seen historically. So once you start coupling all of this, then you get to a position where we may be able to bring down the cost at least by a magnitude compared with some of the other providers of like space stations. But the most interesting thing that I see is that, and we get that question asked sometimes, maybe it's already in the queue, but who are your competitors? And so far we see no competitors. We see potential collaborators and customers. And I know perhaps it sounds a little bit cliche, but ultimately we are providing something that we've not seen so far. And the companies that are building their space stations currently, they could benefit at least for Think Platform 1 and beyond as well. So to that extent, we're working hard with the team to look at what are the biggest cost drivers that we have and really focus really hard on them and look at them in a way, not only how we can, change the paradigm in terms of, hard or deep tech engineering, but also looking at it in terms of the future when Starship is online. What capabilities can we leverage on with Starship within this new paradigm that we have not been able to do in the past?
That's really
so with these two things in mind, we strongly believe that we will be able to provide a product at a cost that we've not seen before.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I love the collaboration, not competition idea. That approach to all these amazing companies together, that they can all work together. They don't have to all be doing things separately, and you can all. And I guess that's part of your design as well, with the fact it can be added on to other space stations. It doesn't have to just be a ThinkOrbital station. Right. It can be connected based on what I've said. So Daniel has another question, which is also really great, actually. He says, do you plan to do any demonstrations on a smaller scale first? Similar to what Axiom has just done, I guess. Do you plan to launch modules to the ISS before doing either your own first full station, or do you think your first add-on will be to a commercial partner rather than to NASA?
First of all, in terms of our development plan, as trying to be an actual company that it can actually survive, we are focusing very much on developing products. That being said, there is a lot of technology validation that needs to happen. So part of our roadmap does include on-orbit demonstration of the technologies that we're doing. The question that we are, and I will be honest, working through right now as we go, because we are developing, is that on-orbit demonstration a saleable product?
Right.
And that is a perfectly viable, reasonable question. It depends on how the timing goes. When you look at historical timeframes for developing new products and getting them out into space and doing that, it's a very long time. It takes decades to get something done. And we're not looking at decades. We're looking at very fast development, trying to change that paradigm. The ISS disappears in 2030. That's only 8 years from now. So, the idea of, are we going to put something up and add it to the ISS? I'm not sure that's a value-added proposition. Yeah. There are a number of space stations being proposed that will be orbited. All of them right now are current paradigm space stations. They're geared, they have, sort of customers lined up. They're going to be labs. They're going to be this. They're going to be that. The idea of large volume is not something that is out there right now in the market. So, and one of the really cool things is, as we have our discussions with other players, they're saying, wait, if we have that, we could do this. The use cases are developing as we go. Getting back to the question at hand, yes, a smaller demonstration of our technology is something that we will likely need to do. Our focus right now is trying to develop products that people need and will use. And if we launch something up just to show we can weld a sphere, but it's too small to be useful, we have to evaluate whether that's appropriate for us to do.
You discussed this a little bit in the last question, but what is the timeline for these projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are currently working on 4 products. And these 4 products, one is a little bit more immediate. We're looking at selling, let's say, the first product in 2025 for it to be launched and commissioned in 27. The second product would be a few years down the road. We're looking at sort of late 20s, early 30s as the in-space servicing, assembling, and manufacturing. Then the full habitational model, that's, when we start getting further down the field in terms of technology and time, it gets a bit more fussy, but we're looking at mid-30s. And this sort of colossal sort of Think Platform 4 space station, 16,000 cubic meters, that's certainly going to be more towards the late 30s. In any case, so how do we get to a situation where we have a product that is suitable, that goes through the qualification process, testing, and final commissioning? What we try to do is to chop the activities or the sprints into clusters of so-called value-added milestones. So, for example, if we take the first product, Think Platform 1, we are aiming to go as aggressively as we can, but with some principles that are key, especially when it comes to safety and mission assurance. And at the same time, we're going through sort of funding rounds in a way that when we finish our phase 1, which is a terrestrial demo of a combination between the robotic arm and the electron welding, we would have created some value. And that means we have either bought some machines or created some IP. And at the same time, we would have created some of the traction, some of the know-how to go to the second phase. And the second phase would be, in this case, the demo of the technology in orbit. And I'm not saying this is a blueprint for how we're going to be doing all the products, but it's more or less in that mindset. Once we get to phase 3, we have done the due diligence and the feasibility. We have already gone through the process of signing the deals, and we would have been at the stage where, more or less like a turnkey solution, we would be completing the product, delivering the product for the product to be operational. Mm-hmm. That's that's more or less what we have in mind.
Okay. So in December, NASA gave grants to 3 different companies to develop a commercial destination in space, Blue Origin, Nanoracks, and Northrop Grumman. And they're pretty big sums of money as well. My understanding is that you did apply for this. Obviously, you weren't successful. But that process, was that useful for you? Did you learn a lot? And is it something you would do again in the future based on your experience?
It was really great for us. So maybe to provide some context, because this comes up quite a few times. When the NASA application closed, we were about 5 months old. And maybe just to give a little bit of insight into the team, we were somewhat hesitant at that time whether if we should apply or not, because, you can imagine if we had an idea of who the likely applicants would be already, sort of several decades corporations or fairly well-established startups that we would be going for this. And the reason why we went ahead and applied for it anyway is because, imagine this, you get the best feedback you can have from top professionals in the field for free. I mean, I know the government, had to pay for their salaries. So, and when we had meetings with them, we were hoping that we would not waste their time, but they were extremely supportive. They were very encouraging. We had, in fact, the meeting at the very beginning, and we had a meeting on the debrief at the end. And they were very encouraging, even, very kindly drawing some parallels with with SpaceX, which I thought we were fairly flattered. But, we knew the risk that this could entail, because we knew we were not going to win, but we wanted to give it our best shot nevertheless. But the lessons learned have been very useful. In fact, by the time we had the feedback, because NASA gives you quite a detailed feedback, we had already addressed some of the concerns that they had raised at the time. So it meant we were also going into the right direction as well. And then just as a final comment, Dave, the other thing to bear in mind is that the CLD, and for those that have read the announcement, was very much focused about bridging the gap post-ISS. NASA and the West generally have a concern to be able to ensure we have continued capabilities in space when it comes to habitational modules. So naturally, and perhaps, I'm sure in their shoes, I would have done the same. You go for a fairly risk-adverse solution. You go for tried and tested solutions. You go for companies that, have some form of track record, that have, sort of a large bucket of finances in place. And that's how, if you read the details, what they were going for. And again, I support that, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Where we come in, we're coming in for with a proposal that is probably not one, but a few generations ahead of what they were aiming for.
And we've also had a question from Ed Rafats. Okay, I always think I'm saying his surname wrong. Anyway, he wants to know, this is a little bit more day-to-day operations once it's operational. He wants to know whether you plan on using virtual reality or augmented reality technology, or even artificial intelligence, to help whoever's on board, the astronauts, to find critical information quickly instead of using more traditional paper or electronic manuals. Have you got to that stage in your development yet? Are you thinking about those kind of things, or is that a few steps further down?
I need to get the names of some of your patrons. I mean, they're really on the money. I can tell they're not only super smart, but they also know their stuff. And or maybe it's one of our guys raising the questions. I'm not sure. But indeed, earlier on, we have engaged with a company that works with AR and VR. They're actually in the nuclear industry. And the idea is twofold. So one, it's to be able to support operators in space, which at that time I would imagine there would be private commercial. I'm not sure what the term is, but like AX1, like the private astronauts, as opposed to NASA astronauts. And for them to be able to have sort of this augmented reality, access to content that would otherwise have to have manuals, be able to see real life whenever they need to maybe service one of the subsystems or maybe repair them as well. I think that's great. And then when it comes to virtual reality, what we're developing now, we have been invited to the Space Houston Center. Big shout out to these guys. It's happening on the 9th to the 11th of June, little advert. In that sense, where we want to provide an immersive experience. The main focus is our stakeholders and customers, so they can see how the product may look like, once it's fully assembled in space. But we will be opening up, certainly when we are called into events. So these are the first two tech that we have already been working on. Now, when it comes to AI, I was talking to my co-founder about this, and what is AI? Are we talking about narrow AI? Is it just machine learning? Are we feeding some algorithms? Is it just code? So I'm not going to go perhaps in all of the details, but for sure, what we're looking at is eventually the space platform to be autonomously assembled, as opposed to, well, certainly remote operation would not work unless we have laser communication. There will be too much of a lag. Most likely it's going to be sort of command and control, where the next step you're sure is going well and you press and it keeps going. The assembly process. Some of you guys, if you've not seen it, you can go to our website. But eventually we would like for this to be able to assemble autonomously. Now, is that AI? It's just code, I think, with some input from sensors and what have you. But if in the future we have some autonomous AI system that, can assemble and operate and do all the qualification and also the structural analysis, I mean, that would be great, but maybe overkill at this stage.
One of the things that we're doing, at least for our early products, is we're leveraging existing technologies, but using them in a new way. I doubt that we will become leaders in the AI industry and on the cutting edge, but we will use every tool that's out there to make our product work. So in terms of autonomous assembly, yes, you don't want to have to launch and then wait until you're over ground stations you've got arrangements with so you can actually do things. We want it to be basically fire and forget. You launch and now you have a station. Those are the two steps that the customers get. So we will be obviously taking advantage of things. We don't have an AI roadmap at this point. Even the manufacturing of the pieces that we need to send up and stuff like that, all of that is going to be informed by state of the art in every system that we can think of. And back in terms of the thing that triggered this was the discussion of whether we're going to use paper or not. We could conceivably take one of our flat pack panels and have it be made out of instruction manuals if we wanted to, but we will not do that. We will likely use computers for all of that type of thing.
ThinkOrbital, the focus is on these 4 products because the 4 products serve a particular market and serve some of the earlier customers that we have been engaging with. But ultimately, you could see also ThinkOrbital as a portfolio of technologies and solutions. And the way we looked at this, and I generally like to see things in threes. You may have seen 3 clusters. So we that's how my brain works. So we looked at 3 groups of technology. And one of them is around digital solutions. And as I mentioned, it's the robotic controls, also the automated welding, make sure that the platform itself, it's monitored for its healthy operations. And that mostly going to be code, not AI, not at this stage. And then there's the hardware design, how we design the panels, the latching mechanisms, power and data. And there's also an element around the welding head and integrating all of that in a way that the outer shell, some of you guys have seen it perhaps on our website, or if you can go there, it's ThinkOrbital.com, on how we actually going to be doing macro sort of meteorite or any type of safety when it comes to once the product is in space. And then ultimately is how you integrate all of that with processes and procedures, especially when it comes to how do we EV weld in microgravity? How would we make sure that these large format panels, they actually come together once the welding process is completed? How we ensure that the station itself will be operational for the minimum lifespan. So all of this will make up, I think, the portfolio of technologies and solutions. And out of all of that, although one of my roles has been in AI, I have not seen anything that would come closer that we would require for AI at this stage. For sure, we're going to be loading, especially when we come to Think Platform 2, we're going to be loading the space platform with sensors and different type of things that will be acquiring a lot of data for us. And some people say data is like the new oil. And with that data, we will be able to understand and also iterate further when it comes to future manufacturing, future processes, future products. But from there to AI, perhaps is a long leap.
Okay, so where will ThinkOrbital be in 10 years, 20 years? Tell us about the future y'all envision, and do y'all plan on buying your own social media company?
That would be LinkedIn instead of Twitter. I'm a little bit more active on LinkedIn. And by the way, if I may, I encourage anyone to reach out. I've got a bit of a backlog of messages, but I'd really like to get in touch with your audience. And they've been absolutely fascinating. Now, we envision a future where we're thriving in space. This is what drives us. When the going gets tough, when you're facing a challenge, maybe a technological challenge, or be able to get through certain things in the work of ThinkOrbital, it's a future where not only us we can go to space, not only going there temporarily, but a future where we can actually live, work, and also play in space. That's why we're focusing, Think Platform 4 being fairly large, where you can accommodate 100+ people. We also acknowledged, although not AI, we also acknowledged that there would be some type of robotics that would help us. I mean, we've seen now Tesla releasing Optimus. I think that would be quite handy, especially if you want to have longer term missions. And where we see ourselves in the future is hopefully carving the niche that we're developing at the moment, being able to satisfy our customer needs. Ultimately, to me in life, since I'm young, it's about reaching win-win outcome. A win-win outcome between ourselves and our suppliers, our partners, our customers, our teams. And so long that we reach that, I think we will be not only delivering on our mission, but also be at an individual level satisfied.
You mentioned there about getting involved and getting in contact, which is wonderful. How do you want people to engage with you at the moment? Do you have a brand, like a whole range of merchandise people can buy or anything like that? Because you've got great branding and your visuals are great. So I think people would like that, right? I'd love a ThinkOrbital t-shirt. I don't know about you, Emily.
Yeah, I'd love a ThinkOrbital shirt. I like it.
I will ensure that we will send you each a ThinkOrbital t-shirt. So
awesome.
The questions are so on point because we're about to launch our store.
Right.
So I think it's going to be a matter of about a week from now.
Wow.
And that will be live on our website. We will be advertising. I use personally a lot more LinkedIn. I'm trying to get into Twitter and Instagram, but LinkedIn is certainly the platform that I use to communicate with our supporters, our advocates. But we got some really nice products. They're going to be close to cost, and any minor profit will be going to a charity of choice by the team. But we really want to deliver some nice swag, something that when you receive it, you really want to wear it on because it's kind of comfortable and it's good materials. So I think we cracked it. We got a good provider. One of our team members found it, and it's going to be really, really nice stuff. From tees, from hoodies to mugs to a few things. We're not going crazy, but just a nice lineup to start off. And mainly black and white. And I have to again put my hand up. My wardrobe is black or white t-shirts. So I keep it very simple, and that's why I thought we can start just with those two colors.
Awesome. Yeah, I wear mostly black, so I'm good.
Perfect. Very good. So we'll get them shipped out as once it passes the quality control. If this is what you like, we'll definitely send them out.
Oh, that's appreciated. But mostly
Awesome.
What is appreciated is your time today. Thank you so much for telling us about all that you're doing. This sounds incredible. Absolutely incredible. Emily and I will probably talk more about this when you're gone, but this is just a crazy. It's like the future is now kind of stuff, right? Like all the things that were science fiction, you're making a reality in a near future. So thank you for telling us about that, and I can't wait to see what you guys come up with, and wish you all the best for that as well. And hopefully we'll have another chat in a year or two, and you can tell us all about the progress as well.
Well, I have a question for both of you, and we normally try to end up with these questions like this. Would you like to go out to space?
Absolutely.
Oh my God.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Good. Well, we're hoping to one day being able to host all these incredible people that we met along the way, are very strong advocates, and maybe having some sort of champagne or some sort of drink that we probably have to sip through some strange container, but that's also quite an encouragement for us.
I would love to be there.
We have joked before about trying to become the first podcast in space. So,
why not now? Why not us?
Absolutely.
Exactly. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon.
Right now the score is man 3, space nothing, but it's a little early in the game.
Well, I really enjoyed that, Emily. I learned a lot. And yeah, I made a couple of notes, and there was a few things that just popped out for me. One of the things that was really clear to me was how much Sebastian in particular valued team, like him being part of this team. And although he co-founded the company, he seems to really love that team and what they're trying to do. He's just so excited about it, isn't he? And I think that's really great to see.
Yeah, I like it when they emphasize it's not, a one-person show and it's a team effort. This isn't really a criticism. I'm afraid to say this because we're going to get a lot of hate in our inboxes. But I mean, as much as I like Blue Origin and SpaceX, I really love what they're doing. A lot of people associate it with, the main CEO of their company. That's not really a super criticism. It's more how the
public perceive it.
Correct. Yeah, I didn't want to say the media because I don't even know if it's the media because I don't think the spaceflight media does it. I think it's how the public perceives it. Exactly. But I love the fact that this is a CEO who's very much emphasizing, okay, it's, I'm not really trying to be a celebrity or trying to be a front person. This is a huge team effort, and we got, a lot of people working in this together to with different people, different companies to try to get this to fruition. I totally agree.
Yeah. He speaks a good game as well. It's all the things we want to hear, and he's just having so much fun with it, which is great. But he knows the industry. He was the way he mentioned the names of the people who developed SpaceX and things like that. He knows what's gone in the past and is inspired by it. And he's taking the best of those things and doing his own thing, which I think is great. I loved it when he said we want to be collaborators, not competitors. I thought that was amazing. But the one thing I take away from this is that you were really disappointed that they didn't mention Gerard K. O'Neill.
No, I was sort of...
It was a leading question, wasn't it? It was a leading question.
Yeah, you guys can't see me right now. I have my Gerard K. O'Neill biography right by me. Whenever I'm having a kind of a crappy day, I always think, man, what would Gerard K. O'Neill be doing about this? Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't say I was disappointed because I think O'Neill is somebody who is appealing to a certain generation, maybe. And I honestly really like Jim's answer a lot because he said, visually, this is what appeals to me. And I never thought of it like that before. Whereas, and yet at the same point, I'm like, I remember all the designs when I was a kid that appealed to me from books, and things that I looked at, I was like, man, that'd be cool to create something similar to that. And another thing that I like too is that they emphasized, they're using sort of technologies that exist, but sort of in a different way, which I really like.
Yeah.
I like how they're not really trying to reinvent the wheel in a way because it's really difficult. It takes probably, oh my God, decades and decades to invent brand new technology. I mean, we're seeing, there's a lot of people like, yeah, we got to go to Mars and Mars this and Mars that. And I'm not oh God, I keep digging myself into these holes where I'm going to get hate emails, but I don't hate the idea of going to Mars at all, but there are problems that need to be figured out. Like, how are we going to shield people from radiation? We can't just send gigantic lead shields into space. There are problems associated that we have to kind of nip in the bud before we go to Mars or before we do certain things. And what I like is that they're sort of doing it in sequential steps. They're not just saying, okay, we're going to do this, but we haven't invented the technology yet. They're sort of like, okay, we have technology we can use and we can do this in sort of steps. We have different products that have different, steps, which I really think is a neat idea.
Logical.
Yeah, it makes sense.
It's logical as well, doesn't it?
It's not a castle in the sky.
What they've done is they've looked at the gaps that exist and said, how can we fill them? We need manufacturing in space on a large scale.
Yeah.
We need that to happen.
Yep.
And they're trying to figure out how to do it. And it can already happen. It just hasn't been done yet. Mm-hmm. So we need that. We need these bigger spaces and we need these things to be able to be joined together easily. So, and hopefully autonomously. If you can make that happen, it can all open up massively and allow us to do a lot more. And that's what they're trying to do. I think it's great. I really think it's great.
Yeah.
So if you'd want to get involved with ThinkOrbital, there'll be links in the show notes as always. And the full unedited video, it was a long interview. The full unedited version is going to be on our Patreon page. It was great spending time with Sebastian and Jim. I hope we get to see them in game. I hope we get some updates, as I said in the podcast. I really hope we get to do that.
Yep. Yeah, me too. That sounds exciting.
Program.
So that's it for this week. We'll be back next week with all the news and sport, as well as some kind of interview or some kind of feature. We hope that you enjoyed this interview, but please let us know. This was a different kind of interview for us, I think. So let us know if you'd like to hear more of this kind of thing, and we'll do our very best. You can contact us via all our social medias or on our website, which is spaceandthingspodcast.com.
And if you have enjoyed it, please leave us a review or press the share button. That will really help us out. But don't forget, in space, no one can hear you, me.
Space and Things has been brought to you by And Things Productions.